Alright, so in this video we're going to be building on the folder and file management skills that we learned in the first part of this series. So in the first part we learned that a folder is something that can contain files and it can also contain other folders. And we learned that files can be anything from music to a picture to a document or a video. So in this video we're going to be going into a little bit more detail about files and folders and what you can do with them. So we mentioned that each file and each folder has its own name. As you can see in the name column here, we've got one called Saved Emails, Charity 2019. And what I wanted to emphasize is that within a folder, each folder has to have a unique name. So within this folder that we're in, we couldn't have two folders called Creative or two folders called Music. And the same goes for files. When we've got a load of files here, we've got one called Frog Photo, Introduction to Tai Chi video. We couldn't have two videos with exactly the same name. Now they could have very, very similar names, but they can't be exactly the same. So just bear this in mind when you're thinking about naming your files and when you're naming your folders. So we're going to go into some practical examples of how to do this, but you can change the names of your folders pretty easily, and you can also change the names of your files as well. And it's important to note that although you're changing the name of the file or the folder, it doesn't change the contents of that folder, it doesn't change the content of that file. So for instance, if I have a music file that's called rock music, if I change it to jazz music, the music itself is going to say exactly the same. You're just changing the name like a label. So we're going to go through some practical examples of how to do that. And then we're going to move on to a really important topic, which is called basically copying, cutting and pasting. And you might have heard of copy and paste before or cut and paste before. We're going to be doing this with files and folders, and I'm going to go through now just a little bit about what that actually means. Alright, so copying, cutting and pasting, what do they mean? Well, when you copy a file or a folder, it basically keeps the file and the folder in place where it was, and it gets it ready for being pasted. We'll come on to that later. Cutting is very similar, except it removes the file or folder that you're cutting from its location, and it also prepares it for pasting. Now finally, pasting, this is when you create the duplicate of whatever was last copied or whatever was last cut. So let's break that down a little bit. So copying is like using a photocopier. You put the piece of paper in and it creates the copy, and you get to keep the piece of paper that you put in first. So you keep the original and you create a copy. With cutting, it's like if you had a magazine and you cut something out of the magazine and then you stuck it somewhere else. You basically remove it from where it was, and then later on you paste it somewhere else. And then pasting basically is a way of creating that new duplicate of whatever was copied or whatever was cut. So we'll get to see how this kind of works in a practical example later. Also later on in this tutorial we're going to be talking about how to create and delete your files and folders, and also why you need to be a little bit careful when you're deleting folders. Right, so let's get started with renaming folders and renaming files. To do this, what you need to do is find the folder with the name that you want to change. So let's see this one here called CV and Employment. Hover your mouse over the name of the folder and right click. Once you've done the right click, have a look for where it says rename, and for this one it's right down the bottom here, it says there. Then you left click on rename. This now brings up this box with this blue in it, so that's how you know that you can now start typing. So you can just start typing and it will then replace the name. So we've got this called CV and Employment. Let's just shorten that and call it Employment. Okay, so I've typed in the new word that I want to be the name for the folder. And now what we need to do is just left click on some white space. Now by white space I mean down the bottom here you can see there's nothing over here, it's just all white. You can just left click on that, and then that will set the name to be whatever it is that you've just typed in. So it's really that simple, just right click, rename, type it in, left click on some white space. There is actually a little shortcut you can do to make it a little bit quicker, which is if you left click once on the name and then you wait like a second and then left click again, you can see now it's come up with that box in the blue. So, you know, it saves you doing the right click rename, but it doesn't always work that well. So I think right click and rename is the easiest way to do it. So we're going to practice that again. We're going to go into one of these folders, but this time we're going to be renaming a file instead. So this one here is called taxi numbers. Let's try renaming that. So can you think, what do I need to do that? It's exactly the same. We hover over the name, we do right click, we find the rename bit and we say left click, and then let's call this taxi numbers. Let's put London to make it a bit more specific, and then left click on the white space. Now can you actually notice, if you look, hopefully you can see this, it just says taxi numbers low and ... And this is because the file name is actually quite long and it's sort of it's kind of overflowing, if you like. So to make sure that we can see everything, what you can do is move your mouse up to the top here, and you can see now the mouse changes into these sort of two horizontal arrows. If you left click, you can drag and resize this box to make sure you can take into account the length of the whole of the file name, so you can actually see everything. So now we can see taxi numbers London. Okay, so practice doing that. You can actually do that with all the columns. You can resize them to the sizes that you want. Okay, you can click and drag in between. Oh, there you go. It can get a little bit fiddly. Okay, so we'll move on now to the next thing. Okay, so next we're going to look at how to create new folders and how to delete them as well. So we're in a folder at the moment, and let's say we want to make a new one. So we've got one for employment and music. Let's say we want to make a movie folder to put some movies and films in. Okay, to do this, we're going to find some white space, and here is some over here. And we can do right click, and then we're going to move our mouse down to where it says new. Now we're not going to click on new, we're going to just move our mouse along. It's almost like moving it along a little corridor, and we can see there's even more options here, okay? And now this is saying all of the different things that we can make, all these new things. Now a lot of these things are files, okay? So we know a Word document is a file. A rich text format, that's a file as well. But we're going to make a folder, so the folder is right at the top. If you left click on folder, you'll see now it's giving us a chance to create the name for our new folder. So I'm going to call this one movie. So just start typing, type in movies. And then left click on the white space. I'll also note if you just press enter, it's the same as clicking on the white space. It's up to you. So yeah, that's how easy it is to make one for a folder. Let's make another folder. Let's just go through it one more time. So we've done movies, we've done music. Let's put one for art. So let's do right click, down to new, move along carefully, and then go up to the top where it says folder. Left click on that. And now we can start typing, and we type in art, and then left click on some white space to do that. Okay, so now we've got our new folders, and we can move into these folders here. Double left click on art. We can see this folder is empty because we've not added anything to it. We're now going to have a look at how to delete files and folders. It's a quite straightforward process. So what you want to do is head over to the name of the folder you want to delete. So let's say I wanted to delete this movies folder. So we have no movies and we're not going to use this folder. Head over and move your mouse just to where it says the name and do a right click. Now I want to emphasize, you've got to right click right on this name. If you right click over here, it won't come up with the options that you want. So right click just on the name of the folder that you want to delete. We do the right click and then we move down the list of options, and you can see here it says delete. So we're going to left click now and delete. And you'll now notice that the movies folder has completely disappeared. Now one thing that I will note is that if you accidentally delete something, it goes into a place called the trash can. I've got a separate video on this, so you can have a look at that. But also you can do something which is called, if you right click on the white space, you can do undo delete. Can you see that? In the middle part of this options it says undo delete, and left click on that, and then ta-da, it's back. The movies has come back. So if you accidentally delete something, go, oops, I accidentally deleted the wrong thing, just do the right click, and then you can see there'll be an undo delete option. Okay, so that's deleting folders. Very, very similar process for deleting files, as I'm sure you've worked out by now. If we go to this 2021 and we find our frog photo file, we right click on that and then we delete. When we scroll down and we go to delete, there you go, the frog video is gone. So that's it, that's how you delete files, that's how you delete folders. Right click and then delete. Okay, so now we're going to move on to do some copying and pasting and cutting and pasting, and both of these require the right click to get started. So we've got a bunch of files here, and we're going to practice copying them. Okay, so this one here is called 5 Ways to Wellbeing. We're going to copy this file. So we're going to make it so we have two of these. We've got one, the original, and the copy. To do this, we do the right click, and then we look for the option that says copy and left click on that, right? So now it looks like nothing really has happened, but this has copied it, and remember from the part of the first part of the tutorial, that means it's prepared for pasting, so we can now use the paste. And to do that, we right click on some white space and we left click on paste. So now you can see, hopefully you can see, we've got two lots of 5 ways to well-being. Now I'll just scoot this along here so you can see we've got 5 ways to well-being, that's the original, and then we've got 5 ways to well-being, and it says copy. Now the reason it says copy is 1, because it's a copy, but 2, because I said that two things in the same folder can't have exactly the same name, so it's added this little bit there to make sure that they've got different names. Now if I right click and paste again, what do you think might happen? And if I do it again, what do you think might happen? So as you can see, it's creating more and more of these duplicates, because paste will take whatever the last thing was that was copied, or the last thing that was cut, and it will create a new duplicate. And you can see they've got very, very similar names, but they've got, this one's called copy 2, copy 3, copy 4, okay? So this is really useful if you've got like a file and you need to make multiple versions of them. You can just copy them and then paste them and then maybe change one of them, okay? So that's copying and pasting. But one thing I want to mention is that you don't just have to paste into the same folder. You know, we've made these copies over here, but perhaps you want to make a copy in another folder. Let's move across into the creative folder. Now, if we right click and paste, you can see that the 5 ways to well-being, the 5 ways, it's a bit of a hard one to say, the 5 ways to well-being has been copied and pasted into this new folder. So the paste function will remember the last thing you copied or the last thing you cut. Okay, it doesn't matter which folder you're in, you can still use that paste. So I just want to talk about moving your files and your folders before we talk about cutting and pasting. So say here I'm inside a folder and I've got a load of folders over here and I've got some files, and I want to do a bit of tidying up and move the files into their respective folders. To do this, I can do something called clicking and dragging. So I use a left click on this file over here, and you can see it's highlighted in blue and this little blue thing's popped up. And then I can move over to where it says creative and I let go. So it's dragging it and it's dropping it over there. So it's moving it into the creative folder. So let's do that for this one over here as well. Let's do it for this one over here. Okay, so that's moving, and that's probably the simplest way to move things about into their folders. If I go into this folder over here, I could do the same thing. So I can move, for instance, this one over here into the archive by dragging and dropping. So that's dragging and dropping, but you might think, well, what about if I have a file, like let's say this one over here, and I want to move it into a folder that is way, way back, like way back into the main folder that I want. Well, I can't really drag it and drop it. It's hard to do that. It's kind of clunky and difficult to actually move them about. So what I can do is I just do right click and I say cut. Now can you see it's gone faint? Okay, so it's still there, but it's gone faint. It's actually removing it from this folder, and now we can move to where we want to go. So let's go right back into our main folders over here, and then right click and then paste. It's going to paste it because it's the last thing. The last thing was cut was this 5 ways to well-being. So we've moved it right down from all of those folders that it was in, and we've moved it up here. So Cutting is really helpful for moving things about in a really useful way. You do right click and cut, and you can lift it out basically and pop it wherever you think it should be. So that's really the main use of cut, and it's the main use of copy is to make duplicates, so you actually want more than one, whereas cut is usually used for moving things about.